The nature and scale of trench warfare during the First World War was shocking at the time and continues to shock historians. What is less well known about, but is equally remarkable, is the scale of the labour and endeavour that occurred underground, beneath the front line, in an entirely secret and hidden warfare.
Lay me low, lay me low, lay me low, where no one can see me.
Today, if you visit the Western Front, you will see peaceful and tranquil fields that betray little of what occurred during the First World War. Beneath those fields, there remain many thousands of miles of dugouts, subways, and tunnels.
The two front lines that once stretched 400 miles from the North Sea to the Swiss border lie just beneath the surface. Much deeper still, the evidence of another war. A 3,000-mile network of tunnels dug by both sides in a highly secret war within a war. By late autumn 1914, the Allies had halted the German offensive. Within 3 months, all movement had stalled. The great armies of the First World War were in position, and the Western Front was born. Dreadful losses and the grip of winter forced both sides to dig in and wait for spring. 3 years of stalemate had begun. The deadlock inevitably raised the thought of a traditional military tactic in a siege, taking the war underground, tunneling beneath enemy lines. But British commanders were reticent.
There certainly was a belief that tunnelling could be avoided, and that if the British didn't start it, then the Germans wouldn't. However, it was simply German tactical doctrine that if trenches were 100 yards or less apart, then they would automatically start tunnelling.
And so, in secret, they started an underground war that for the next 3 years would increase in scale and ferocity. The full truth about the British response remained an official secret until 1962. Even now, 80 years later, its history is still being uncovered in the archives of the Royal Engineers at Chatham. Peter Barton has been researching the underground war for more than 20 years. It's his ambition to locate and explore one of the most important Allied tunnel systems of the war, the underground complex at Mount Sorel, near the Belgian city of Ypres.
The Royal Engineers kept such detailed maps and plans that by overlaying the originals onto today's maps and taking measurements and bearings, we know we can pinpoint the tunnels to within a yard or two. In the Flanders area, all underground systems were built in solid timber, often English oak, and these workings have been full of water since 1918, which is a great preservative, so with a bit of luck we expect to be able to explore both the tunnels and the dugouts. The biggest dugouts housed 5,000 men and more. They're amazing structures.
Here too are filed the stories of the clay kickers, the miners who went to war.
It would be nice to find some tunnellers. It won't be very easy though, because they would all be at least 100 years old now. But it's possible.
There were men like Lieutenant John Westacott, who fought a hand-to-hand battle in the dark under Mount Sorel. And there were unsung heroes. Sapper William Hackett, who won a posthumous VC for refusing to leave an injured comrade. And the tunnelling war's extrovert and dynamic architect, John Norton-Griffiths.
He was action itself. And And he saw the war coming in 1914 early on, and he saw the generals dithering and the politicians dithering.
In civilian life, Norton-Griffiths was a contractor. His company was building sewers in the clay beneath Manchester, similar ground to Flanders. He was convinced that clay kicking, a process devised for digging small tunnels swiftly, would be ideal for military mining.
So what Norton-Griffiths wanted the army to do was simply to take his clay kickers to the front, take them into the frontline trenches and let them really get on with digging towards the Germans.
In a letter to the War Office in December 1914, he suggested the formation of the moles, civilian tunnelling units under his charge, coal miners for the Somme chalk and clay kickers for the Flanders clay. The idea was shelved.
So the letters were filed under M for moles and forgotten.
December the 20th, the Germans stole the initiative. They tunneled beneath Allied trenches at Festubert near the French-Belgian border and exploded 10 mines.
The effects of the first blow, the first German mine blows against the British line, was one of quite considerable shock and surprise. If you consider that in trench warfare, the only safe place was to dig underground, and that a trench and a dugout could give considerable security to the infantrymen from both rifle machine gun bullets but also shell fire. Once the earth beneath him was actually being undermined, this really robbed him of that security.
Now the British had to retaliate. Kitchener summoned Norton-Griffiths.
He stormed into Kitchener's office, dressed in a mixture of hunting kit and uniform, and took a tool from the fire, got down on the floor on his back, and started to demonstrate what he meant by clay kicking.
Kitchener instantly demanded 10,000 clay kickers, but there were barely 1,000 in the country. Coal miners were also in short supply, as in wartime mining was a reserved occupation. And besides, to the War Office, the notion of recruiting an army of untrained, free-thinking men was as unsettling as the methods of Norton-Griffiths himself. The generals feared an undisciplined mob.
I think what GHQ were fearful of was that war itself is a terrifying business, and unless men are well trained, well drilled and well disciplined, you simply cannot fight a war.
They said to me, "Would you volunteer to dig a mine under the German trench?" I said, "You must be balmy asking me to do that." But I was always a silly bugger like that, volunteering.
With Norton-Griffiths in charge, recruitment began. Specialist tunnelling companies were formed under the auspices of the Royal Engineers. He wanted older, more experienced, steady men, and ignored War Office objections by offering them 6 shillings a day, 6 times an infantryman's pay.
Most of the tunnellers were from the northeast, Northumberland way, or South Wales, and most of them were smallish but very physically broad, fit men.
And that's all the names. They were picked for their particular skill and their particular job. And you couldn't take, say, the platoon of the guards, say, "You will get on mining." Doesn't work that way.
That's one thing that the First War did for me. It got me out of the damn pits, and I've never been back since. And I won't be going back either.
On February the 19th, 1915, almost 2 months after the Festubert mines and many subsequent attacks, Norton-Griffiths finally took his first draft of clay kickers to the front.
In a matter of days, they were taken from the sewers of Manchester to the trenches of Belgium, and were immediately set to work. They were really bringing civilians into war as bad as it would get. In the winter of 1914, the conditions at the front were quite appalling.
By March 1915, the first tunnelling company was installed on the Western Front. Eventually, there would be 25,000 men working underground, with twice as many infantry in support.
We were the labourers. They were the experts. We were the labourers. And we were treated as such. No pain to be polite, if I can put it that way. We were a necessary bloody nuisance.
We were there to do a job, and that was our be-all and end-all, really. Had to justify it. You're going here, you're going to do this, and that was that.
All of a sudden, they said, anybody here can use a shovel. Out I stepped, volunteered, which you shouldn't do, but I did, because I thought it was something different. Well, one or two other chaps done the same. So we were all sent to this pit, which was 80 feet down. Then we had to walk along probably about a mile.
I think the infantry initially perhaps may not have welcomed tunnellers arriving in their sector unless the Germans were already active. Once, however, the Germans began to blow mines, then the infantry would become quite desperate for tunnellers to go and counteract the effects of them.
The German mining threat was growing rapidly.
They were tunnelling one way, we were tunnelling the other, both for the same purpose. And that's for them to blow up our front line and for us to blow up their front line.
John Norton-Griffiths was now recruiting furiously, both in Britain and on the Western Front itself, where many miners were already in uniform, having volunteered for infantry regiments at the outbreak of war. He poached them with his offer of 6 shillings a day.
Norton-Griffiths' working methods were really completely at odds with traditional army methods that deferred to rank, hierarchy, chain of command. Driving around in his Rolls-Royce and getting things done with a mixture of cajoling, threats, bluster and charm.
And he even resorted to bribery.
Champagne brought kippers from England. He brought a trunk full of kippers from England, and whatever it took.
At all costs, tunnelling had to be kept going around the clock.
The tunnelling war has been likened to the largest civil engineering contract ever carried out under conditions of most extreme danger.
We went down there every night and worked 8 hours. And we had to walk back, I suppose, a couple of miles to a rest each day. And then go back again the next night. We had to walk the 2 miles every night, 8 on our own, under gun fire. We never found out what the purpose of the mine was. They don't tell you that, that's all secret. That's all secret, that was.
Very few were told what they were doing. To be captured with such knowledge could lead to the waste of months, even years of toil. Secrecy was paramount, and so was silence.
If you stopped, you could hear the Germans, the other side, tunneling, you could hear them, tunneling next to you. And I was bayonet man, standing there ready in case they broke through, so as I could shoot and, you kill them as quick as you can, or they'll say you, one of the two, it's either you or them.
Lieutenant John Westacott's account details several underground breakthroughs. In June 1916, he led 4 of his men into enemy tunnels. Their purpose, to explore and destroy. Almost discovered, they hid as 4 German miners passed by.
The Germans came past us, torches flashing, heavy footwear clumping on the wood floor. Stealthily, we crept around a corner, following their footsteps, gaining on them rapidly. The Germans paused on seeing the torches of a second party of our men. They challenged them, and, not getting a reply, fired a shot. Our second party fired back. They were trapped. The Germans turned and came face to face with us.
On that occasion, they won the day, but they were not always so lucky. Later the same year, Westacott and his sergeant emerged from a shaft into their front-line trench. It was full of Germans. Unbeknownst to the tunnelers, the enemy had captured the line during the night. Diving back down the shaft, they sounded the alarm.
All hell broke loose. The Germans kept dropping more and more men down after us, piling on top of their own dead and wounded. We had a terrible scrap down there, using candles and torches. We were often fighting in the dark. Groping for epaulets on German shoulders was the only way to tell friend from foe. We used knuckle knives. Very handy. When the infantry recaptured the trench, some of us had been fighting for over 20 hours. We were so sick and weary from the gas and the smell of blood. We had lost 60 out of 80 men. We couldn't have taken much more.
Some 2,000 Allied tunnelers died in the war. The biggest killer was invisible. Every underground explosion trapped carbon monoxide gas in the tunnels. It was odorless and lethal. The tunnelers used canaries to warn of its presence. They clipped the claws so the bird would topple over when affected, rather than grip its perch in rigor mortis. A tunneler's life depended on the length of a canary's claws. Entombment, hand-to-hand fighting, and gas. All the time digging, where there was no night and no day beneath the wasteland.
I think the worst part is finding a way. It is so easy to get completely lost. The Ypres salient was so deep in mud, you know, it took 12 hours to get a wounded man from the trench line to an ambulance. I was many times on the track, and nothing but dead mules, dead men, dead horses, nothing.
Hi Johan, it's Peter. Morning, yeah. Just a quick call. I was with the Royal Engineers at Chatham yesterday, and I found some maps and plans of the Mount Sorel dugouts. Now, do you know the owner of the land?
Gerard de Vos's family tilled the fields of Mount Sorel long before they were driven from their farm in 1914. He has no idea of what lies beneath, and is skeptical, but intrigued enough to give permission to dig.
Oh, okay. Come on.
Johan Vandewalle's tavern sits squarely on the old British lines at Polygon Wood, near the village of Zonnebeek. The Great War has always been a part of his life. It's now his passion. Once a tunnelling engineer himself, Johan has become an expert explorer of the dugouts of Flanders. Careful study of trench maps, plans and war diaries are the only means of finding a complex that no one has set foot in for 80 years.
What's the maximum depth we can dig to with...
But the team must be cautious. Reopening the tunnels could cause collapses.
Okay. What about the farmer? Is he... he's quite happy that we're going to destroy his land, is he?
Yes, he's quite interested. Yes, quite interested. Yeah.
The enemy wanted Mount Sorel badly. It would complete their domination of the high ground overlooking Ypres. The plans are accurate. Today, the roads and woods are once again where they were in 1914. So by taking measurements and bearings, they can locate the old trench lines and pinpoint the tunnels.
Right. The entrances are definitely in this embankment here, maybe a little further along. This piece of ground here has been built up, hasn't it? The farm said it had been built up. When was that? 19 when?
64, 65.
Is that in the same place as it was?
Yes, exactly in the same place.
Let me long, let me long, let me long, when no one can see me, when no one can find me, when no one can hurt me. Show me the way, help me to say all that I need to, all that I needed you gave me, all that I wanted you made me when I stumbled.
The end rifle.
Lift every duck board.
Oh, I see the big lady. Jesus, still in the clip. Oh, this,
Everybody is issued with a fork like this. Perhaps not this one, because this one is silver plated. That's the hallmark on it. So perhaps that belongs to an officer rather than so good. Strange thing is, this is just barely a metre below the surface. This is it. It holds so many secrets, this landscape. The Germans took this position twice and were driven out twice at huge loss of life, and each attack was preceded by a gigantic barrage, and the trenches were completely destroyed, and they were retaken quite quickly, but when they came back there was nothing left. The shafts were full of water, they were full of corpses, and they found it difficult to even find the trenches.
Now we are here. Yeah. So there's the bend of the road.
And the wood, this wood behind us is on the same plan today as it was then.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
At Mount Sorel, the opposing lines were barely 50 yards apart. They ran through woods and fields, along the crest of a low hill. Deep beneath was the labyrinth. There were several entrances in the Allied front line. Some were shafts, some staircases. These led to shallow defensive workings with many listening posts, tunnelers' quarters, and rescue stations, each separate area protected by a special gas door. Further shafts led to deeper workings. In these cramped tunnels, directly beneath no man's land, were more listening posts. Beyond, probing far beneath the enemy lines, the fighting tunnels, the sharp end. At the end of these, a chamber packed with high explosive.
There were 6 of us on patrol, and this damn big shell dropped right by us. Can't you imagine that? I was terrified. We all crouched down, you know, waiting for it to go off. And it was a dud. I was thinking, never see home again, you know, and I thought this was the end, you know. Terrified. We were all terrified. You know, breathed a sigh of relief when it didn't go off. We soon scrambled away from there. Don't you worry. Hey.
Last year we collect about 225 tons of ammunition. In the 60s they stopped our services because they thought everything was away, but they stay collecting. The stockpile we have, it's about 350 tons of ammunition, shells. Sometimes we have a farmer who is blowing up himself, or a collector. A few months ago, a collector, he cut off the fuse and he blew himself up.
Found it, Johan.
Very wrong. A nail stuck in. Right.
We were down there head to tail on our hands and knees. And when we came out, we couldn't stand up because we'd been in that hands and knees position for hours. We just couldn't stand. It was the most horrible job that I had on the Western Front, I believe. I faced many a shell and sniper, but I never liked mining.
Did you move this? Let's have a look down the tunnel. Check the condition. What's the air like?
It's good, it's good. Some flaps there.
The air got weaker as you went. The further you went, the weaker it got. Because the poor bloke that was using the pump, he had to keep going all day, all the 8 hours. Keep pumping. Because if he'd have stopped, it would have been finished.
Yeah, it seems all right, doesn't it? It's not that musty smell before. Yeah, a little bit of a collapse there. There's definitely been a collapse at the end, but we don't know how bad.
You look no wet?
No, it's very dry. The wood's in amazing condition. There's a bit of damp here. Let's just have a look. No, that's solid. Solid. Yeah, that's okay.
Tick, tick, tick. Somebody's picking away. Another eerie feeling. You know the chap of the pick like to kill you.
Okay.
What happened, Joe? Yeah, look.
The infantry only got a tablespoonful a day. Yeah. But these guys, because of the pressure, was it every 4 hours they could drink as much rum as they wanted. And in Westacott's diary, he says that the pressure was so intense that he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning before his servant brought him a mug of rum. Before he got out of bed.
Yeah, God.
One of the biggest problems was that in the silence, their imagination would start playing tricks on them. And they'd be able to hear their own heart beating. And I think that was a sound, possibly the Germans close by.
Yeah.
It's solid, it's okay.
Look at this, Peter. Look. This.
What's this?
Look for a bullet.
The walls are scarred with bullets and shrapnel. There was obviously a fight here. According to the plans, these are the very tunnels where Westacott and his men fought the enemy to a standstill. Both sides had many trained listeners. It was on their word that decisions to blow or to wait were made. When one side heard the other, a race began to blow the enemy before he blew you.
Part of one job as an officer was to sit listening to things on your ears. And you would hear the German getting a bit nearer, a bit nearer, a bit nearer. And your mind was racing. Shall I get out? Shall I stay here and tell them what's going on? Or what? If you stay there too long, you might be there forever.
He spoke in a whisper. He said, we're going to blow it up. I said, what? He said, we're going to blow it up. So I said, oh, I'm still picking. He said, bloody good luck to him, I said.
It was really a case of who blew first, whether it was us who were going to be buried or the Germans were going to be buried.
There's a blockage here. So if there's been an explosion here, it means that the Germans were probably less than 10 feet away. Well, it looks like this is the roof here. These are the roof timbers.
Yeah.
So it looks like the Germans have blown this from above. So it's blown it down into... Very, very frightening.
Only one Victoria Cross was awarded to the tunnellers, to Sapper Hackett, who was awarded his medal posthumously for refusing to leave a buried comrade on the grounds that he was a tunneller and couldn't do so, and was later buried by the tunnel collapse. The tunnellers often lost out because of the secrecy of their operations. This is especially so during the preparation for the deep and long tunnels for the Messines operation, when a dozen tunnellers were buried alive at Petit Bois, and after about 5.5 days they managed to break back into the tunnel, and they found 11 men dead and 1 man, Sapper Bedson, still alive. Sapper Bedson certainly never got a medal. The tunnellers who carried out the rescue under extremely hazardous conditions never got recognised either, even though their commanding officer put in recommendations, and he was told that it was because the Messines operation was so secret that no awards could be made.
The Messines operation was conceived to relieve pressure on the Belgian city of Ypres, which lay within a salient, a bulge in the line, which the Allies sought to straighten. In April 1915, Norton-Griffiths arrived to propose an ambitious plan. his tunnelers would help break the stranglehold on the beleaguered city. To the southeast of Ypres lay the German-held Messines Ridge. Norton-Griffiths' proposal was to create the biggest explosion in history, a man-made earthquake, and shake them off it. Over 2 years, 11 tunnels would be secretly dug, several of half a mile long and up to 120 feet deep. Then 22 giant charges would be triggered, followed by a huge ground and artillery attack. To reach these depths, shafts had to be sunk deep into the blue Flanders clay. Peter and Johan have located one such shaft on the outskirts of the city. To enter the complex below, they too must dig down, like the tunnelers before them, through earth, sand, clay, and mud.
Mud, oh, I've always mud all over the place. Really, it's terrible.
I once saw a man and his gun carriers and all that swallowed up in the mud, just sunk out of sight.
The weather seems to have got better since.
Battered down to the ground, down upon the dugout floor.
After 4 days of digging, the shaft entrance was found to be unstable and dangerous. But the plans showed another entrance, a stairway, less than 20 yards away.
Yeah. Oh, a long corridor ahead. Yeah. Another one. Look at this. One timber to replace. I think we've definitely found the HQ. This is all telephone. Yeah. Some of them go on, some go into this room. It's been lined with something to try and keep it as dry as possible in these conditions. It's like roofing felt, sort of tarry. And the whole room has been lined with it. There's an extremely precarious remains of a steel girder on the roof. That's an amazing thing. You find it in the Titanic, right? There's a bench in here, shelves, in very good condition. There's probably a table somewhere, wasn't there, with the radios on it. So, do you think this could have been signals?
Yeah, there's been.
All the cables come in here virtually, don't they? Some go on. Yeah, and that would follow, wouldn't it, with the walls being clad with this, so that the equipment would stay dry. No, this is probably the signals room. Did I tell you, Johan? No. Donald Hodge. Yeah. I asked him if he could have chosen any item to take to the wall, what he would have chosen. He said a mobile phone. It would have made quite a difference.
Offices, brigade headquarters with telephone exchanges, dressing stations could be installed underground, and by 1917 dugouts were being specially prepared for infantry attacks that would accommodate whole battalions of 1,000 men. Even whole brigades of 5,000 or more men could be accommodated underground so that they could be brought up safe and unobserved, ready for an attack.
Here, look. There's a room here full of bunks. Full of bunks. Well, collapsed bunks. So this is the tunnelers' living quarters. The roof held up with complete trees rather than earth timber.
It's a passage there over there with the little
yeah. Another passage, right. Okay.
Oh, the dugouts there were damp and cold. Cold as my dugout, wet on my feet. Waiting for whiz bangs to send me to sleep. Yes.
Somehow there was a resignation about things. It was as though we knew it had to happen, there was no escape, and you just did it. You accepted anything. Very often, if it was cold, you'd have your greatcoat with you, and get under that, and you could light a cigarette, and you were at peace with the world then.
On one occasion we had a very deep dugout, and we got an old brazier from somewhere, and we had a bit of fire on to keep us warm. And it was my turn to go up on the top, and as soon as I got in the fresh air, I became unconscious and dropped flat on my face, and I was mud from head to foot. And I thought, oh hell, miles from home, how the hell am I going to get clean?
Some chaps that sleep, we just chatted. You won't be surprised to find that women were part of it. Food was a very big subject about what we were going to have when we come out of the army. They all had their own mother's favourite dishes. Nobody made handkerchief hot pots like my mum, and we just went into dreamland.
J. Webster and Sons Limited, 1915, half a pint.
Here men lived and died, wrote cheery letters to families and lovers, tended the wounded. At night they climbed the stairs to bury their comrades. And all the time the tunnellers were digging ever further beneath the enemy. And by June 1917, all roads led to Messines.
There was a little drawing of how to build a tunnel and where to place the explosive. There was an arrow from that going up, and it said, to heaven.
At dawn, on June the 7th, 1917, 19 charges totaling almost £1 million of explosive were detonated.
All of a sudden, as though somebody had lit a torch. It started at one end and it just shot along.
And the dirt goes up in the air, 50 yards. Yes.
It was like a mountain of bodies going up and coming down. It's like a mountain standing in the sky. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I thought, how many poor buggers have gone up with that lot?
So John Norton-Griffiths finally got his earthquake. The effect was monstrous. An estimated 10,000 German soldiers lost their lives in a moment. The blast was heard by Lloyd George in Downing Street and by Norton-Griffiths at home with his family in Brighton.
The mines had the effect of completely neutralising any defences that the Germans had prepared. For example, the concrete pillboxes were simply hurled physically into the air. Germans were obviously completely disorientated, and there are accounts of men being found wandering around in no man's land or in the remains of their frontline trenches, weeping and bewildered. This must have had considerable impact upon German morale, knowing that their miners underground could not prevent the British tunnellers from blowing them up. Mining, therefore, contributed to the attritional warfare that gradually wore down the Germans and ultimately paid off.
Deep inside him, he must have known that the whole war was completely unjust and unnecessary, and he wanted it over as quickly as possible. And if it meant blowing up Germans, well, too bad.
The great mines had been instrumental in achieving a model victory, the Allies' first true success of the war. But now the front lines were becoming mobile, making the work of the tunnellers obsolete. There was no longer a place for their very special brand of warfare. Messines had been their finest and final hour. Within months, the ridge was back in enemy hands. The underground war was over and destined to be forgotten.
Shall we at last be united in glory? Only remember what we have done.
Memories of ex-servicemen blinded in combat talk about their experiences in Sound Like Sunlight tonight at 8:45 here on 4, and that's followed by the real Kaiser Bill.